If we take a look at like this one here, I gathered a few images like this too that are nice paintings. They're very nice paintings, but again, they lack what I would say is a real strong story point or a real clear story point. And like I said, all of these, I picked all of these because I think they're great paintings. And you can look at something like this. You can look at a painting like this and say, okay, it's a predominantly cool painting in kind of a twilight kind of a scenario, and there's some warm light in this central location of this church. So, and with the people kind of in line, okay, so the linear aspect of these characters, we get a little bit of a focal point for the church in the orange here. Okay, so, here's the basic church. And then we have this rail here. We have bushes on the ground. We have this over here like this. And we have these characters all lined up in these little... These create rhythm, or they create lines by the connecting these dots. Our eyes will connect the dots. And these little dots out here, if they are aligning like these do, we'd call that closure. Individual little dots that visually we connect. If they're all lined up in a way, they give us a directional movement. So that in our head, we create closure. And that brings our eye towards this center again. We have another dark area here that's broken up back here with darker shapes, but the overall mass of that darker shape does taper a little bit and brings us into this area. We have a couple strong verticals that again, and then one from the outside here that comes all the way down here. And the interesting thing that I want to note about this other tree in the foreground, you see it doesn't seem vertical. You see it's at a stronger angle. If it was at a vertical, I'll show you what happens over here. If I put a tree that's vertical here, as opposed to what we have in that image, where there's a tree at an angle like this. Because it's an angle, it stays as an element within the image. When it becomes mirroring the frame, it becomes less of an individual element, pictorial element in there. It's just a framing device. It loses a sense of object in the image and just becomes a framing element, okay? So there's something lost when you put anything that's really parallel story-wise. You lose a little bit, but what you do is you gain a visual element that is just, it's subordinate, and yet it can be a powerful tool as just a framing division, okay? When it's not parallel, okay, like this or like this in here, it remains an element, but it also can kind of ease the direction of your eye and break things up a little bit, where we have these other verticals going on in here, back here. We also have a rooftop that comes down and in here like this, okay, that also brings our eye in here. So we have these elements that are bringing our eye in, this in this way. Another rooftop that's coming in here and pointing this angle in here brings us our eye in. So these the design elements within this composition all lead our eye into that warm light and keep us focused on that. So that's one of the things you can look at, that even in an image that might not have a big story, or maybe there's a story, maybe there's something specific about this, but you need to know something about the story, if it's some type of an allegory or something, you need to know that other information. Another beautiful painting depicting an interesting kind of light during more of a stormy sky, a low afternoon light in a stormy sky, okay, or mid-afternoon in a stormy sky. When I say a stormy sky, when it's overcast to a certain degree and the value of the sky is dropped down, what ends up happening is you get a little bit darker shadows and the lights become much more dramatic, okay? So that's really what happens in this overcast situation. So the artist, taking advantage of that moment, makes a dramatic lighting statement in here. The story could be just the lighting, That could be just the thing there. Okay. Now I've got an image here. In this image, there's a couple writers, and they're obviously looking over their shoulder. They're looking at something. There's something going on in there. There's a little bit more of a story going on with this because we're focused on these guys riding along, and they're involved with something. There's strong staging with light over dark and dark over light. So the mechanics of the image are working. The story is, if this was in context with other images, we might be, if these guys were tracking somebody, and that's what this statement could be, that they're looking for signs, or they're tracking, or they're looking for something along the way. That could be part of the story. So it could sit within a film, having some kind of a story. A painting like this, though it's a handsome painting, it's really more about the handling of the painting. Okay? It's really a departure and a statement about the application of the paint. It's more about that than it is about telling a story about these particular flowers or so on. There's a little bit more of a story to this one, but it's still, the texture is overpowering. It's still saying, it's the way I painted it more than what the subject is. Okay? There's the activity, the fact that the girl is peeling some fruit. There's and the type of lighting that creates, there's a mood setup, and there's an activity going on. Beyond that, if you saw this in a movie, maybe there's a conversation that's going to be delivering some other kind of text, while this is, could be the subtext. She could be sitting in the room, and maybe her mother and her aunt are talking about somebody or something that she knows something about, and she's acting like she doesn't hear it or whatever. So you could build on what's the story, what's the subtext, and how do you do that? So this could be the answer to something like that if you were going to tell that kind of a story too. So, I put these in because I thought they were strong images, some only depicting how the image was done, and some that could be more storytelling type images. So, and we're interested in really kind of looking at story type images. These were some sketches, and I brought in just some markers. What I tend to do is I'll tend to work on like Post-its like this, and I'll use just the gray value markers and a pen and a pen brush, to get this kind of a thing. And I'll make sure that the values, if I have like 3 or 4 distinct values, I'll make sure that I don't use more markers than that, and I make sure I get a gap, like maybe in the clouds, it's a value number 1, and then, or a 10. And then the sky might be a 3. I'll make a gap. So I don't use 1 and 2. I don't try to render anything that way. I'll keep a gap in order to maintain clarity. The top one, a little bit of the sky might be light. The clouds, the little cloud at the top might be a 2, and the sky might be a 4. So it might drop down. I'm always leaving a gap in between. Again, just to make clarity, just to make sure that it's clear. These were sketches for a moment, and so I'll often do a number of sketches to capture a certain moment. This was where this bear, who was a human that was incarnated into a bear, has to make a commitment to take on his challenges and go to the top of this mountain and confront his fear. So it's a real turning point, a real decision that the bear had to make. And there was a bird that at the moment in the story, a bird that was kind of his guardian. It was a foil, the character was a foil in the story. And so it would talk to him and pretty much deliver information that could be unspoken, or it got him to communicate in a way that, because he was a solitary bear. So, it gave him something to communicate. So what I would often do is do a series of these little images, and they gave me about 15 story beats. So they wanted to tell the story or pitch the story. And what these were different attempts to capture that moment. So I took those 15 moments and I did a series of sketches for each moment until I arrived at some. I shared them with the director, and sometimes we'd say, okay, take part of this and part of that, we put it together, or maybe one you like better than the other. And so we kind of find those images. And I found I enjoy working that way because once I start putting a couple images down and looking at my response to them, we all start out with a good idea, but then you get it down on paper and you realize, well, it wasn't that clear. And so you keep going and trying to make it more clear. And so I'll do that. And then when I get feedback from the director, that's when I can hear how they responded to it, what becomes clear to them, and how they want to tell the story. So that communication works out really good. And I enjoy working that way. These were a series of sketches that I did. I was working for Disney, and I was working with a director, and we were going to do a movie on trucks. It was going to be a spin-off from the Cars franchise, and it was going to be trucks. And so what I did is I went through, and I think there was about, in the end, I think there was about 85, 87 sketches that were the beats of the whole movie. You know, I took this little bit of this treatment, and, you know, this was a case where, you know, the main truck and his friends went to the back of this mechanic shop. They were going to go in and steal some tires. Okay, and so they went into this shop, or they snuck up to the shop, and they got busted by the owner. Okay, and when the owner confronted him, he panicked and bolted out the window and drove off. A tow truck pulls him back and says, you know, I won't report it to the police, but you're going to work off what you did, the damage you did. And so he kind of mentors this young truck. And the older truck, turns out he had to go undercover. And evidently the truck was an undercover truck, the older one, but the new one didn't know it, and that kind of a thing. So it was a kind of a story. It was actually a story based on Whitey Bulger in Boston, and the Italian mafia and the Irish mafia. And except in this case, it was Whitey Bumpers. And so, you know, it was a crime movie and stuff like that, and undercover cops and stuff like that, and a lot of fun to research. But these were these different moments where this big kind of monster truck comes and snags him and hauls him off. Okay, and situations like this, I needed to show that you know, one. In this image, it's like the appearance of the bad guy. The bad guy shows up storming down this little alley and slams into the truck, hooks him from behind, and starts to tow him away. So that's the sequence of the line or the sentence, and the images follow those breaks in the sentence. That's it. You know, and that's how I did it. So what I did is I took the story in a real simple term and just talked it through and did an image that only said that. This image here, the truck in the middle that is getting towed away, I needed to make it the focal point, right? So what I did was, there's a couple things that I did in here. One, I had things leaning into it or going in towards that vehicle. It has a little higher contrast than the other two vehicles. And the larger vehicle, usually, I mean, Hitchcock said that the largest thing on the screen is what gets your attention. That's the most important thing, is the largest thing on the screen. That was his way of showing that. And we'll take a look at that in some another week too. But it can be large, but if it's cropped, it's an incomplete image. And being cropped, I could get one eye in, I could, you know, do this. And then once I crop him that way, he's no longer, even though he's big, he's no longer the most important thing in there. He can become a directional device. So, and again, then I use the banged up little truck that can't chase him now. That was the whole idea. The kid truck who was, you know, working with this guy, he has to be incapacitated, and then the other guy gets away with the truck. So that was this scene. And then there was a confession while he's getting fixed. And that was, you know, that little piece. So there was a little section of the movie. So that's how I would start to kind of depict these things and break these things down. These were a series of images that I did for Winnie the Pooh, and they were just little moments, but I was trying to make them. These I did with Post-its on most of them were on Post-its or small story pads with the pens and stuff, and I was just trying to make it look more like the book, the actual book, so the sketching style was more like that, but just establishing the styling of the trees and the type of foliage that would be there that was, you know, indigenous to the 3 Acre Woods. So there really is a 3-acre woods. And there really is a place near the writer's home, which was up for sale. I don't know if it's still for sale, but it was, and there's like a Pooh Styx bridge that you can go and tour the whole thing. It's all right there. And it was the inspiration for all the stories. And so I had to go in and take a look at the reference material and the research to see what kind of plants, what kind of environments they were. Was it a flat ground? Was it hilly ground? Was it mountainous? What was it? To give truth to the story. So all that had to be sorted out, and so that's what I was doing with some of these images. The images with the red balloons. These images, it was a moment where little Piglet, who's scared of this legendary character in the woods, the little balloon gets stuck in a tree trunk, and they wanted to kind of anthropomorphize this thing to make it a scary tree or some kind of a creature of his imagination. So I just did versions of that. This is an interesting situation too, where this was kind of an experiment that I was working with, and we can do some things like this too. This was a moment, again, this was a story beat, but this was a moment where Pooh has looked in every pot in his house and there's no honey left. So how do you stage that when it's a small room, but they wanted to get the feeling that he looked in every pot, and they really emphasize every pot. So there's different ways of doing it, and one of them, like in the upper left, make the pots larger so they fill more of the frame. That's one way of doing it, where you don't have to enlarge the room. The one on the upper right, the room got so big, it was like no longer his space. Now it's this huge room. So what you want to do is maintain the integrity of the space, but then do you make the pots larger? Do you make them fill more of the frame? Do you so that became the question with these. In each of these images, the mass of those pots take up a different space, amount of space. And so I did a whole bunch of these. I think this was 6, but I think I did about 14 of these things just because I started thinking a little bit abstractly, and the directors really didn't care that I was going to that depth of of exploration. But it did allow them to choose and a range to pick from. So then they'd bring it back, where I might go down into, my different design ideas. They would bring it back to, okay, here's the clear statement that we want to say. And so we kind of go from there. There was a moment in Spiderwick Chronicles, this is for Spiderwick Chronicles, where the kids get chased out of the woods by these goblins and so on. So it was just a case of depicting this. And then this was some stuff for a game where this mysterious box gets brought to a museum, and this guy gets contracted to go in and open this box. And it turns out it's Pandora's box, and it unleashes all these crazy things. That's the beginning of the game. But there is like a little backstory of how Pandora's box, the story of Pandora, and how the box came. So what I did is I just did these simple little images to help tell the story. Okay, so these were like little story panels just to try to be clear and offer a couple of suggestions. As it was given as a gift, but these are a couple of different versions of it that was given, and she was told not to look at, not to open it up, the image 3 on the right there, but she does, and, everything breaks loose from there. The idea, or the legend, the box was sealed, and then there was a secret group of people that snuck it out of Rome and hid it somewhere. And it ended up and discovered at the bottom of the ocean. And then it was hoisted up and brought into the boat. And next thing you know, you see it on the newspaper in this museum, top to bottom left. And then the one to the right where they close it in. And they're gonna look at the inscriptions and stuff on it to try to figure out what it was, what this whole thing is. So these are different kind of storytelling images. And I think the difference here is the emphasis is on what are those simple words? What are the words that you need to say, and get to the point and only do those words. Just as simple as that. These are some concept paintings by Paul Felix. And I put some of these in here for you guys to kind of browse. Because again, they have, this is from Tangled. The image in the mosaics in the back kind of tells the story, and she's seeing it for the first time. But Paul is really good at, focusing your eye. You can see how her hair splays out on the ground. The bricks and stuff all lean in towards her in the perspective. So there's things that help move your eye through this area. Here he just used the 2 colors, or 3 colors really, but to show conflict, stylizing the color. This was there's a lot of times, when we can kind of pull from some of those images, and, a lot of times the viewers aren't going to get that completely. But what they'll do is they'll see there's different periods, and we'll talk about composition too, but there's different periods of time where certain styles of composition were in vogue, okay? And those transitions and changed, over the years. But some of them we still recognize and we still lean into. And we'll talk about some of those too and how they break down. Light over dark and dark over light, the silhouetting of shapes for a little bit more of a dramatic moment for Tarzan here. Just the mood and the tone of this kind of a stormy desert sky as this car goes racing down the road. This is for an animated film, and this was a little trailer where the guy got stuck out in the desert. This was just a little moment in a little auto repair shop. The spy aspect to this car driving up the pyramid in Vegas. There's some other things going in Vegas. This is for early iteration of Bolt. And I put these in because if you look at them closely, they're very, very simply done. They're just kind of sketched in. But the clarity of the image, there's a lot of complexity in Vegas. And he kind of distilled it down to a clear read. It lacks the total chaos. It is colorful. It has a lot of directional lines and stuff in here, but it's not as chaotic as it could possibly be.